Echo of Death, a Tom and Scott mystery, fifth book in the series. By Mark Richard Zubro, publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, narrator, Eric Ost. Acknowledgements. For their kind help and patience, Barb D'Amato, Hugh Holton, Rick Paul, and Kathy Pekaiser Reed. Chapter 4. We took Lakeshore Drive to Sheridan Road and on up through the luxury homes that lined the North Shore. Most of the way to Waukegan to our east, we caught occasional glimpses of the fog-enshrouded lake joining the dark and sodden clouds pouring their gloom toward civilization. Wisps of fog brushed against the Baha'i temple as we followed the curve of the road into Wilmette. Most of the trees were bare by this time in October, but their number and thickness spoke of tree-lined streets. We passed Tudor, Georgian, and Queen Anne homes of immense size celebrating the wealth of the inhabitants. Luxury mansions and their now denubbed foliage rose in Gothic splendor on both sides of the road. The mostly dormant but verdant, well-manicured foliage meant that hordes of landscapers could look forward to years of work. All the times I'd driven up this way, I didn't ever remember seeing a person going into or coming out of one of these homes, much less someone out lounging on the lawn or even simply staring out a window. It was as if the inhabitants were as misty and ethereal as the miasma of clouds that were now trying to engulf them. We got slightly lost as we drove through downtown Highland Park. We passed recently closed Fort Sheridan. Developers slavered over the possibility of grabbing morsels of the property so it could make them richer than they already were. The funny thing was, I'd grown up in your average middle-class home on a teacher's salary. I could never possibly have afforded one of these homes. Because of the fortuity of circumstance, I was the lover of one of the highest-paid baseball players in the country. Now we could, if we so choose, live in one of these dream homes. Just past Lake Forest College, I spotted the turnoff of the Proctor property. I checked carefully at numerous intervals, but I couldn't detect anyone behind us. Following Lester's directions, we pulled up at a pair of pale brick columns that flanked a vast iron grate. We couldn't see the house because of the 6-foot brick wall and dense foliage inside. I didn't see any button to push to announce our presence. A largest cottage made of the same pale yellow brick as the wall and gate posts stood off to the left inside the wall. An actual lodge keeper emerged from a small door in the overgrown hut and strolled up to the gate. I saw the look in his eyes that I'd seen only in crazed Marines in Vietnam just before they marched into the jungle, not caring when or if death dared get in their way. I wouldn't be surprised to see this miscreant in combat fatigues and toting a machine gun. Right now, he actually wore an open beige rain slicker over gray pants and a white shirt and black tie. In a very soft voice, he asked us our business. We told him we were expected. He told us to wait and took his good time returning to the lodge. He emerged about 5 minutes later with a large key that he used to unlock a small portion of the gate that was wide enough for only one person to squeeze through at a time. After a searching look behind us along the road and a few brief words spoken into a walkie-talkie, he slowly pulled out another key, slowly inserted it in the small lock in the center of the gates, and slowly pulled them open. We drove Lester's silver BMW onto the property. The driveway couldn't have been less than a quarter of a mile long, with nary a pothole or blemish. I assumed it was against the law in these kinds of suburbs to permit such flaws in the pavement. We arrived at the exterior of a 2-story gray brick Gothic revival home that looked to be sitting on at least an acre of land. To the left, I could see tennis courts and an Olympic-sized pool covered for the winter. I saw oak trees of tremendous girth standing as sentinels beside the immense pillar-encrusted square porch. An enormous number of brick chimneys sprouted from the parts of the roof I could see. We pulled up in the circular drive before Scott had the engine turned off. A liveried servant emerged from the front door and silently led us up the steps and into the foyer. This room was 3 times as big as a school classroom. Double doors led off to rooms left and right. Ahead of us was a grand staircase with halls on either side, with openings showing more corridors leading deeper into the house. The servant asked us to wait and left us. The floor was lined with broken granite and marble mosaics laid in a star pattern at regular intervals. Bronze vases filled with artificial flowers lined the walls. A 10-foot by 10-foot Rubenesque painting featured a woman with naked breast and well-rounded rear, surrounded by flowing robes. It dominated the room from its location on the right-hand wall. Scott nodded toward the painting. "I bet it's not a reproduction," he said. The set of doors on the left side slid open silently. A man in his early 20s looked at us, glanced up the stairs and down both hallways, and then beckoned us over. Everything he wore was white shorts, shirt, socks, shoes, with a towel draped around his neck. He had the lightest gold blonde hair I had ever seen. It was cut short on the sides, and the wispy waves on top were something I could have buried my nose in and run my fingers through 1,000 times. His stomach was flat. His calf muscles and biceps stood out with definition, but not bulk. As we neared him, he turned sideways for more anxious looks up the stairs and hall. His butt had the same perfect roundness of Glenn Proctor's. The blonde hair and the swath of freckles across his nose that his perfect tan couldn't hide told me this had to be a close relation. He confirmed this by saying, "I'm Glenn's brother. Bill, I don't want anyone seeing me with you, but I've got to talk to you when you're done." "With my father?" "About what?" I asked. "No time now. I'll find you after you're done." He shut the doors. "He's beautiful," I said. "He looks a lot like Glenn," Scott said. "You didn't think he was so hot looking?" "I never said Glenn wasn't hot. But this guy is perfection." Scott raised an amused eyebrow. "Are you spitting?" I recognized perfection. Half the faggots in the city would pay a fortune to go to bed with that guy. Artists would flock to sculpt his figure. "Maybe they already do," Scott said. I shook myself. "He's scared about something. How are we going to talk to him in secret if servants greet us at the door and a gatekeeper is blocking the entrance? They must have people spying out of every nook and cranny." "I don't know," I said. "I said he was beautiful. I don't know how bright he is, but he may know or suspect something. We've got to try to talk to him." We heard a discreet cough and turned to see the servant who let us in standing near the bottom of the stairs. He beckoned with his white-gloved hand. We followed him down the hallway to the right of the grand staircase, made a right turn halfway down, then through a door to another hall that led past numerous closed doors. This corridor had dark maroon carpeting and was hung with impressionist paintings, each with its own brass-covered light. The servant, a man in his mid-30s, opened a door at the end of the passage and said, "This way, gentlemen." We strode through the entry into a room that let in tons of light through floor-to-ceiling picture windows in both walls. A tall man with gold hair flecked with silver held out his hand to us. He introduced himself as Jason Proctor and murmured polite greetings. When I glanced around the room, I realized that the servant was gone. I hadn't heard him leave. The focal point of the room was a 30-foot stone fireplace. The sofa across from it was only long enough for one baseball team to take naps on at a time. Another wall had a pine media cabinet with a branch bench nestled nearby. Easy chairs in the same plush fabric as the sofa were spaced around the room and against the walls. Hand-woven silk pillows clustered at various points on the couch and loungers. Brass fish on stands gathered on one end table, and 3 enameled spheres rested on another. The coffee table had an enormous collection of dried flowers in a gargantuan brass pot. Wicker chairs and an oak coffee table, along with wooden beams in the ceiling, added to the rustic effect. One could get lost in and read books forever in the comfortableness of these surroundings. Scott was rich, but this was real money spent to feel comfortable and luxurious at the same time. Jason Proctor wore a white button-down shirt. Peking was under a gray cashmere sweater that zipped up the front, beige slacks, gray and red socks, and Laurel Piana's gray cashmere slippers. Proctor led us to the couch. He took a seat opposite on a lounge chair. "Mr. Carpenter," Proctor said, "I have followed your baseball career for many years. I am an admirer, although I admit I don't attend many games. I've often thought of buying a team. I did watch the 7th game of the World Series you pitched several years ago. Magnificent. They talked baseball for a few minutes. And you, sir? Proctor turned to me. He's my lover, Scott said. I'm a school teacher in the south suburbs, I said, and somehow felt foolish for saying so. I guess the surroundings intimidated me more than I thought. Proctor gave no indication that our being lovers made a difference to him. Teaching is a noble and highly underpaid profession, Proctor said. He managed to sound paternal, but not condescending. I wonder whether it was a trick he had. Scott said, Where about your son? Yes, I'm aware of what you say happened. The police called and your friend Lester mentioned it. We have been in almost constant contact with the police in Chicago and in Mexico. I talked with the team owners this morning. Apparently, Jason Proctor didn't have to go through intermediaries. We can confirm that he is not with the team at the moment, Proctor said. We aren't lying about what we saw, I said. He studied us for several moments. The flesh on his face was still taut, and his frame was well muscled, if beginning to sag a little in the middle. He was in good shape, and I could see where his sons got their athleticism. When he was younger, he might have been as attractive as the son who'd met us in the hall earlier. He trained his sharp blue eyes on us. I cannot believe something has happened to my son, Proctor said. I felt as if I were trying to fill Lake Michigan with a thimble, but how can you press a parent when you are bringing the news of the death of a child? I know this can be difficult, sir, I said, but do you have any idea if Glenn was in some kind of trouble, doing anything illegal? I have no idea. He has had troubles before us, as everyone knows, but I thought after this last time he was clean. I had hoped. I talked to him 2 weeks ago before he left for Mexico, and all we talked about was the team, baseball, and his prospects for the coming season. Do you know if he had any other plans while he was in Mexico? I asked. Something to do with your businesses? He might have spent some time with some of my executives, Proctor said. A few of them have been down there looking for ideal locations to build. We'll be moving more operations down there now with the North American Free Trade Agreement. I often had Glenn work for me. I wanted to help him, give him a sense of responsibility. Did he have any enemies here or in Mexico? Scott asked. None that I know of, Proctor said. This is difficult for me to discuss with you gentlemen. I understand you were friends with my son, and if your news is true, it will be a crushing, unbelievable blow. Please understand, I don't mean to denigrate what you've said or your intentions, but I have a large number of business dealings in Mexico, and I'm having everything there examined carefully. If Glenn is dead, and if he was in trouble in Mexico, I want to find out about it first, not read it in some sleazy tabloid. Your son is dead, Mr. Proctor, I said. His eyes lit on mine and kept their gaze there. He looked away first. I saw his hand tremble. We'll have to see what the future brings, was all he said. He pressed a button on the side of his chair and stood up. I had a lot of other questions, but the interview was obviously over. I didn't know the servant had entered until Proctor said, James, please see these men out. He shook our hands, wished us luck, and we were out the door. Halfway down the hall, I said to the servant, James, when was the last time you saw Glenn? His voice was correctly cold and disapproving when he said, I'm sure Mr. Proctor has answered all of your questions. I didn't bother to ask again. James led us out the front door as I put the key in the car door. A voice called to us. I looked up and saw Bill Proctor beckoning to us from the side of the house. We joined him there. Proctor said, I knew James wouldn't let you out of his sight. He's a nosy old queen. So are we, I said. Proctor raised an eyebrow, but he said, I wanted to catch you here. Dad has a whole mess of guards. Way before Ross Perot brought his paranoia thing to national attention, Dad was heavily invested in protection. Of course, my dad's not as rich as Ross. Bill Proctor led us to a side door, down a hall, and up a staircase. This hall matched the others for simple elegance. Proctor addressed comments to Scott as he led us. My brother told me you were his best friend on the team, that you were the only one who stood by him when he got suspended the first time. He also said you were a fag. At my frown, Proctor said, Sorry. That's what he called you. That's kind of what you said a few minutes ago. Are you guys really gay? I didn't believe him when he told me Scott Carpenter was gay. Hard to believe a professional baseball player bends over. Kinda unbelievable. Scott stopped in the middle of the hall. You couldn't hear a sound in the entire house. Scott and I looked at each other, then back at Proctor. Scott said, Sometimes I bend over. Sometimes Tom does. If we're really in the mood, we both do it at the same time. It's magic. Oh, Proctor said. I let silence build for a minute, then said, You wanted our help. Yeah, right. He cleared his throat, then continued down the hall to the last door on the right. This is the room Glenn grew up in as a kid, Proctor said as he opened the door. Glenn's room had a king-sized bed with a quilted flannel bedspread made of warm autumn colors. He had a dresser and a chest of drawers of solid oak. The carpet was deep plush gold. The white walls over the bed were filled with pictures of all the big-name athletes of the past 50 years. One other wall was filled with a fantastic array of posters of unicorns. On top of the dresser were a wide variety of bongs and water pipes. An open door off to the left showed a bathroom with a sunken tub and a sitting area. Opposite this door were a brown leather couch and 2 matching chairs. A large picture window had let Glenn look out on the world. Outside, I could see the wisp of fog had changed into a thickening mist. Visibility was maybe 100 feet. I could make out 30 or 40 feet of relatively calm lake. The waves barely brushed the shore. Hardly a ripple disturbed the cold gray surface. I could see the dim outline of a pier with one boat anchored at each side and one at the far end. I didn't mean to insult you guys back there, Proctor said. What did you want? I asked. I need to talk. Something screwy is going on. My father told me that you were coming and that it was about Glenn, but he wouldn't say what. I'm worried about him. Obviously, his dad hadn't told him about what we'd reported to the police. His manner certainly didn't seem to include sorrow or suffering. He was more like a kid who had been playing a prank and was worried about how much trouble he might be in. He changed into blue jeans and running shoes. He wore a white fisherman's sweater partially covered with a blue denim jacket. He leaned back in the chair. I don't trust my dad or the servants. I've got no one else to turn to. I need your help. First the one brother and then the other who knew how alike they might be. No matter how pretty he was, I wasn't prepared to trust him very far or help him very much until it was proven to me that we could trust him. I said, You better not be trying to jerk us around. Scott said, That's awful harsh, Tom. I don't know who I trust at the moment, I said to him. Then I turned to Proctor. I'm not sure what your game is, but we've been chased and shot at, and I'm not willing to take any chances at the moment. Is this necessary, Tom? Scott asked. Yes, I said. I was fully prepared to list the problems his sympathy had gotten us into. At this point, all precautions were to be taken. Look, Proctor said, I really think Glenn's in trouble, and I don't know what to do. He looked and sounded sincere. His brother was dead, and he had sounded as if he genuinely cared about him. I don't know what to do to get you to trust me, he said. My dad said you had news about my brother. What's happened? I'm sorry, I said. We've got bad news. Suddenly I felt ashamed and awkward. Here I had been bullying some probably innocent kid to whom we were about to give perfectly awful news. I'm sorry, I repeated as if my sorrow could take some of the sting away. We found your brother's last night at Scott's. He'd been shot through. I paused, cleared my throat, shook my head. He was dead. No, Proctor said. I'm sorry, I said, and felt silly for saying it for the 3rd time, but I don't know anyone who has the perfect words for horrific moments like this. Tears came to his eyes. I really loved him. I've looked up to him ever since I can remember. He turned away from us. Tears flowed down his face. I can't believe it. His shoulders began to shake. Scott reached out and the kid sagged into his arms. I felt awful for him. I know it'd be devastating if I found out one of my brothers or my sister was dead. Scott held Proctor, patted the blonde hair, rubbing his hand in a circle on the back of his jacket. I wondered whether his dick was getting hard and felt like a crude creep for thinking such a thought. Proctor's crying turned to sniffles and muted gulps for air. "This is awful," he said. "What happened?" I told him about his brother and gave him a brief synopsis of our adventures. As I spoke about Glenn, tears made occasional forays down Bill's cheeks. He didn't seem to have a hanky, but wiped his jacket sleeve across his nose and snuffled deeply. After I finished, Proctor stared out at the silent vapors gathering outside. Periodically, he snorted the snot in his nose and tamped, and at the occasional tear that still escaped. "I'm sorry about your brother," I said. I got a brief nod in response. We sat in silence for some minutes until Proctor asked, "You know what I remember most about him?" I shook my head. "He was only a year older than me, so we did a lot of things together, but the best was Christmas. We'd hunt through the house room by room, searching for the presents. We'd always find some, but then Christmas morning he'd come into my room and wake me up, and we'd be the first ones to the Christmas tree like all kids, but it was always just the two of us with the enormous Christmas tree lights still off, faint gray light coming through the windows, us still in our pajamas, and we'd search for the presents with each other's names on them, and we'd make piles around us and forts and shoot silent guns because we didn't want anyone to hear us, and then we'd combine our packages into one big fort and nestle inside and tell secrets and guess what was inside the packages, what we'd asked for and hoped for, and when your dad is as rich as ours, more often than not, our wildest dreams came true." He dried a few more tears with his jacket. "He was the best brother," Proctor said. "I hated it every year when he went away to school." "You attended school here?" I asked. "I went to the public schools on the North Shore. There aren't many better private schools, and I wanted to be with kids I knew. My parents didn't have a lot of choice with Glenn. A lot of schools kicked him out. Even Dad, with all his money, couldn't keep him in. Glenn had some brave teachers in kindergarten and first grade. They forced my parents to come in for conferences. Glenn was impossible. He was always good to me, but we lost several servants because they wouldn't put up with the way he treated them, even when he was 5 or 6, but Dad's money always prevailed. It always has." My dislike for Glenn Proctor and his privilege burst out in almost unwanted sarcasm. "Poor little rich boy," I said. "Tom," Scott said. "It's all right," Proctor said. "I was lucky to have a rich dad. I don't hate him for that." Glenn loved him. When we were kids, they always hung around together. Glenn was oldest, and I guess that was special to my father. He stopped talking, and I let the silence continue. Finally, he asked me, "What did my dad say when you told him?" "I don't think he believed us." "Typical. He thinks his money will buy anything. There aren't enough men and horses in his kingdom to put back his son's life." "Why wouldn't he believe us?" I asked. I stopped trying to understand my dad years ago. I live in a separate world. I'll see him occasionally at breakfast like today, but that's about it. "What kind of trouble do you think Glenn might have been in?" "We've been trying to figure out who might have killed him and who would be after us. You know anything about what he's been up to lately?" "I don't know about recent danger. When we were kids, he was always the one of us who tried the most daring or new or unusual thing. He'd jump first, climb first, dive off first. He got me my first beer, my first hit of dope, showed me how to beat off, got me my first condom." "What kind of trouble did he get into in school?" I asked. "I remember he got suspended one time in first grade for telling the teacher, the principal, and the social worker to fuck off." "Not a usual first grader's response to stimuli," I said. "No," Proctor admitted. "Let me think. What other stuff he used to do?" He strode to the window and wiped the sleeve of his jacket on the window, as if to clear away the mist gathering outside. He spoke without turning around. "One time he threw a condom at the second grade teacher. It was her first job out of college, and she couldn't cope with him. I heard she ran down the hall shrieking, although that could just have been Glenn exaggerating. I know she didn't teach the next year in that school. I remember he used to steal a lot of stuff. One time I asked him why. Since we had so much at home, he said he liked to. It was fun to see all the grown-ups and the kids go nuts trying to find things, or make things right or fix things. This happened when he went away to school? I asked. Bill turned back to us and sat back down. I'm not sure. I think he found other things to get in trouble about. Drugs, I said. Proctor nodded. And alcohol. I used to watch him sneak drinks before, during, and after family holiday parties. He must have been 5 or 6 the first time I saw him do it. Once in a while he'd offer me some, but I hated the taste. He started on drugs in 5th or 6th grade. When he was away at school, he came back one summer and introduced me to pot. I smoked a few times with him and his buddies each year, but I didn't see him as much as he got older because he was into baseball so much. I had lots of other sports, crafts, classes, and special trips. Thinking back on it, my parents probably planned it so I'd have less contact with him. I seemed to be in a lot more activities than most of my friends every summer. He ever do harder drugs? I asked. Cocaine and marijuana, mostly, Proctor said. He never did anything else in front of me. Claimed he wasn't an addict before and after he went away for rehab. The family kept it real quiet, and with Dad's money, that means total silence. Nobody knew Glenn went away after sophomore and junior years in high school to some clinic. I think the baseball people would have hesitated if they'd known about his problem. Would have avoided him completely, Scott said. What I remember most was the fun times, the wild things he did. Proctor nearly smiled. Like what? I asked. Bill was silent for a minute, then smiled. One time we were at some friend's house in Wisconsin. Glenn didn't have his driver's license yet, so he must have been about 15. The kids we were staying with weren't old enough to drive either, but we took the car one afternoon. We drove to some railroad tracks, and the other kids suggested we let half the air out of the tires and drive along the tracks. Glenn did. I remember the wild sensation of flying down the tracks, barely feeling the bump of the tires. It was a convertible, and Glenn had real long hair at the time. His hair flew in the wind as he laughed and sang. No train came? Scott said. No, Glenn's luck always seemed to run that way. Even with some of the dumbest stuff he did, he finally graduated high school from an exclusive place somewhere in Vermont. I think my dad had to promise them a huge endowment for them to let him be in the ceremony and graduate on time for a celebration. We had half the kids on the North Shore at this big bonfire on the beach. It was great. Glenn was drunk and nobody else was feeling a lot of pain. When Glenn took a lighter out and casually set his chest hair on fire. He did what? I asked. Swear to God, Bill said. Just casually flicked it on and applied it to his chest. How come his chest hair didn't just go poof with him going up in flames? It can't be just luck. One guy threw a glass of beer on Glenn, but it missed the flames. Actually, what happens is the hair kind of curls in on itself and melts, and the fire goes out. It's hairspray and stuff that makes it go poof in flames. I was flabbergasted, but I believed Glenn Proctor would do something that crazy. I didn't stop Bill from talking. I might be impatient about getting us out of danger, but I hope Bill might actually mention something that could help us. And the man had his grief to work out. If he could remember with smiles and tears, then that was okay. Didn't he ever get caught? Scott asked. Never for the really big stuff, Bill said. He came close once when he almost got busted for a huge drug shipment. I raised an eyebrow. Well, what happened? He must have been 16. He'd gone down to Mexico for a month. My dad has lots of businesses down there, so we went pretty often. How Glenn got to know the local drug people, I don't know. He always seemed to be able to know people with illegal secrets and deals. Glenn agreed to have a huge shipment of drugs sent back across the border with some stuff for my father. Glenn almost got caught. By the cops? I asked. No, my dad's security forces. He has a lot down there. Glenn managed to get the shipment invoice changed, like maybe seconds before he would have been discovered. I think the head of security was awful suspicious. Maybe Glenn paid him off some way, I don't know. Anyhow, the stuff got to Chicago. The drug guys got their shipment, and Glenn got enough stuff to supply his whole school for a semester. Bill was silent for a minute. He sighed and tears started again. Mostly his schemes seemed to work. Whatever this one was, Scott said, it went bust big time. Yeah, Proctor said. The tears came again. He really loved me. Bill said one summer when I was 12, he and I hot-wired some farm equipment and drove it around in the middle of the night. It was my idea, and I got them started. Glenn took the blame for me. I was too scared to speak up, and when I was 16, the first girl I loved broke up with me. Glenn stayed with me the whole night. I loved her so bad, and Glenn was so good. He helped me a lot. I really loved him. He shut his eyes and sobbed. Scott held him briefly. It was nearly 9 o'clock. I wasn't eager to go back to our hotel room, but I didn't see any alternative. We stayed a few more minutes to comfort Bill Proctor and told him if we found anything out, we'd let him know. He promised to do the same. By 10, we'd drive through the drive-up window at a fast food restaurant and arrived back at our hotel. Edna was still on duty at the desk when we returned. The lobby had a collection of transvestites and prostitutes, the tame version of which you've seen on Phil Donahue and Geraldo. In our room, we sat on the bed and ate greasy hamburgers. When we finished, I tried calling our answering machine. I got the distinct bong from AT&T, then punched in my code number. I listened to the beginning of the message on our machine and then punched the 2-number code that gave access to the messages. Scott lay down next to me on the bed. I listened to his breathing and the pauses between messages. The hotel itself was amazingly quiet for the moment. One message was from Lester asking us how we'd done and to give him a call. Another was a woman's voice who said her name was Felicia Proctor, Glenn's and Bill's mother. A third was from Brad, no last name, telling Glenn he was at the Hotel Chicago and he had to talk to him. Next, I tried calling the cops in Chicago. I got Joe Quinn at his desk. I told him about our conversations at the Proctors. He seemed slightly interested in that. He said, "We've tried to find out what we could about who attacked you on the street this morning, but I gotta tell you, we've got nothing. I don't think we're going to get much. We obviously need protection. A crime is trying to happen. Us getting killed." Quinn said, "I don't mean to be rude, but your buddy Carpenter could afford to hire an army. We're poor cops with a lot of real crime and cases to solve." "We're scared," I said. "We're stuck in this dump and we don't dare return home. What do you suggest we do?" "I don't know," he said. "I called a lawyer. I like my legal talent to be nice and conservative, and that's what my lawyer was. Todd Bristol had been my lawyer since before I met Scott. Now we kept him on a yearly retainer. He was a partner in one of the big law firms on LaSalle Street. I caught him on the way out to a party. As soon as he knew it was me, he covered the phone, but I heard his muffled voice say, 'This is going to take a while. You'd better grab a cab and go ahead. I'll be there as soon as I can.' I knew Todd hated parties in direct proportion to his lover, Ed's passion for them. Todd wouldn't mind missing any portion of it. 'What is going on?' he asked. 'The radio is filled with crazy stories. Reporters are dying to talk to you guys.' 'What have they said?' I asked. 'One of your neighbors swore he saw Scott driving one of those carriages down the inner drive like somebody out of one of those Roman chariot races.' I explained everything to him from the beginning. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, 'Where are the necklaces?' 'Mine's in the penthouse. Scott must still be wearing his.' 'Get them to a safety deposit box or someplace reasonably safe as soon as you can.' 'I'm worried about going to the penthouse,' I said. 'You could try going in with a police escort,' Todd suggested. 'Or wait. Then whoever is after you will just pick up your trail again. I think those necklaces are a menace.' 'You think they're the key?' 'I don't know. But that's the most obvious place to start, although it would have made a lot more sense if whoever was after you simply said, "Could we have our necklaces back, please?" Of course, yours may be gone already.' I told him I wanted to call Lester to get more information about the Proctor family and their wealth. 'Does he know where you are?' 'Yes.' 'I wish nobody knew. Don't tell anybody else, including me, where you are, not even your best friend. Something loony is going on. You cannot be too careful.' 'I've known Lester for years,' I said. 'Have you been chased and shot at? Have these people shown a tendency to be nasty and persistent?' 'Come on, Tom. Use your head. You're frightened, aren't you?' 'Yes.' 'Good. Then use that fear to be supremely cautious. The cops are probably all right, but don't take any chances.' 'What should we do?' I asked. Figure out who's behind all this. Find out what they want, and if at all possible, give it to them. And if it is impossible, try to make a deal. We need to find out about Glenn Proctor's movements in Mexico and what he was really there for, I said. I don't think I can help you there, but I'll make a few discreet calls in case there are skeletons in that closet. With all that money and all the enemies he's made, Jason Proctor's got to be hated by a whole lot of people. I thanked him and hung up, then called Lester. What happened at Proctor's? He asked. Something about his eagerness made me weary, or was it that Todd had sufficiently frightened me into general paranoia? I gave him a brief outline of our two discussions. I asked, can you find out about any real estate dealings old man Proctor had in Mexico? The reason his kid died and why we're being stalked has got to be connected with what Glenn was doing in Mexico. You could go down there and try to track his movements, Lester said. I thought of it, and I suppose we could, but I'd rather not be snooping around in a foreign country where I didn't know the language or any of the people. At least here I knew people and could call for help. I explained all that to Lester. You're right, he said. He promised to do what he could to find out about Proctor Sr.'s dealings in Mexico. I sat near the head of the bed and leaned my back against the wall. I was totally bushed, and I gazed out the window to the brick wall next to us. I'm tired, Scott said. You and Glenn know somebody named Brad. Brad who? I explained about the message on the machine. The only Brad I know is a guy from Glenn's rookie year. He used to pal around with Brad Stawalski, who was kind of big and goofy and not real bright. The kind of guy you play practical jokes on. Stuck with the team that year for a few months because our regular first baseman was injured. They were roommates. Did they keep in touch? Glenn didn't mention him before he was killed. I tried calling the Hotel Chicago for Brad Stawalski. He was registered, but his room didn't answer. Do we go chasing after him tonight? Scott asked. We've only had a few hours sleep, and I'm too wiped out. We don't know when he'll be back, or even if he knew anything about what happened to Glenn. We agreed to check on him tomorrow. With the lights out, we got only a faint glow from outside through the torn gauze of the curtains. Our view was of a brick wall 2 feet away. We stripped to our underwear and crawled into bed. The pillows were nearly flat. The metal joist of the bed stabbed my back through the thin mattress. My feet hung over the end, and I thought it was heavenly to relax. Scott snuggled close, lying on his side next to me while I lay on my back. I could feel his legs and chest warm against my own, along with his arm draped over my chest and his chin on my shoulder. I reached over with my right hand and ran my fingertips down his arm to the elbow, then over to his side, down his torso, to his waist, and then to his hips, where the cotton waistband of his tight white jockey shorts met his skin. I let my fingers rove down the waistband to where it stretched and made a bridge over his flat abdomen, then over to where his skin met material again. I heard his breathing quicken in my ear, felt his desire with my hand. I turned toward Scott and pulled him close. I listened to the sounds of air being taken in and being expelled from his lungs. I put my hand on his chest, felt the golden downy fur and the slightly freckled skin, and beneath it, the beating heart. I sighed deeply. I was incredibly tired. I felt myself dropping off to my favorite fantasy of making love to Scott on the pitching mound after he hurled a complete game victory, and he would pull me to him, and he'd be all sweaty and happy about winning, and he'd kiss me passionately in front of his assembled teammates and thronged fans. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.